Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Building the Business Case for Sales and Operations Planning. My name is Sujit Singh. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Arqiva, and presenting with me is Dr. Bram Desmet, who is the CEO of Solventure, who I will introduce very shortly. This is a series of webinars we have prepared for you. We started on January the 28th, where we talked about supply chain transformation. Tapan had presented that one. We are today going to discuss the business case for sales and operations planning. And following up from this webinar, there will be two more. On March 17th, we'll have a webinar on the steps involved in supply chain planning technology implementation. And on March 31st, we'll talk about hierarchical supply chain planning. So we are happy to present this series to you. Hopefully you are getting good information out of it. But let's get on with today's topic, building the business case for sales and operations planning. Bram, if you would go to the next slide, please. So it's always good to welcome you. Today's webinar is presented by Arqiva as well as by Solventure. And both of us are very happy to see you here. Let's go. Bram, to the next slide, please. So at Arqiva, as well as with Solventure, who is our partner in Europe, we believe that improved business performance starts with better planning and specifically with better supply chain planning. Businesses have a lot to do, and planning gets them focused on the things that are more important, where there's more bang for the buck, where there's more value, compared to execution, which basically focuses on becoming more efficient. So if you want to decide upfront what are the right things to do, you need better planning, and that typically leads to more value creation. So we strongly believe that improved business performance starts with better supply chain planning. Next slide, please, Bram. Arqiva and Solventure, both of us have been working in this field of supply chain planning, and only in this field for quite some time now. Arqiva since '93, Solventure since 2007. And this is our specialty. This is all we do. Gartner has recognized our solution, the Arqiva Supply Chain Planning Suite, as a leader in their Magic Quadrant. Combined, we are approaching 20,000 users worldwide. If you look at the revenue that is planned using our solution across multiple companies, those revenues would be approaching $70 billion. The solution itself is industry agnostic. We work in the process industry, chemical industry, food and CPG. We work in discrete industries, automotive. So it really is industry agnostic. As long as we are talking about supply chain planning, Arqiva and Solventure are both able to deliver on that. We have offices in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Solventure is based in Belgium. And as you can see from the map, we have customers pretty much all around the globe. Next slide, please, Bram. And what we believe is both of our companies believe in creating supply chain solutions that are unique to the business problem, the business situation that exists within your business. We have found that one size does not fit all when it comes to supply chain planning solutions. So we try our best to make sure to configure, to cater the final solution. I mean, of course, there are some similarities, but we try to make sure that we cater it to your own unique business and your own unique supply chain situations. Next slide, please, Bram. As far as the solution is concerned, we have a full suite S&OP solution, right from demand planning, where we are trying to project what does the demand look like out in the future, to inventory, to setting targets, whether it's single echelon, multi-echelon, to synchronizing the demand and supply to make sure they are in balance, making sure they are within the bounds of the capacity, so capacity planning, and then of course tying it all into the S&OP so that management and executives can monitor it, visualize it, and execute on it, and then connect it to the integrated, to the financial planning so that finance can then use that to project the financial numbers based on the supply chain plan. So our solution is this full suite that covers all these functional areas and delivers value for our customers. Next slide, please, Bram. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Bram Desmet, who is the CEO of Solventure. As mentioned earlier, Solventure is our partner firm based in Europe, in Belgium. And Bram is one of those thought leaders from whom, myself, but also the industry has learned a lot. He has pioneered the discussion in the field around the strategy-driven sales and operations planning. At this point in his career, he has 20 years in IT and supply chain consulting. He's also a professor, adjunct professor at the Blerick School. He also teaches in China, for example. I personally have learned a lot from Bram, and he's very passionate about the topic of strategy, supply chain, and advanced analytics. A little tidbit, Bram did his PhD on the topic of multi-echelon inventory optimization. And in fact, in the Arqiva software, the multi-echelon inventory optimization module is based on his thesis. Bram has taken the task of teaching into writing. He has written two very good books. I highly recommend both of them. One is on the topic of strategy and financial metrics, and then the other one is the strategy-driven supply chain, how you can target your supply chain to be more aligned with your company and the business strategy. So we welcome Bram. Bram,
thank you, Sujit.
Very, very pleased to be with you today. And let's maybe begin the conversation. Bram, as you have talked about, certainly with me in the past, about the supply chain triangle, and this whole idea of S&OP feeding into that. I'm very, very happy that you will be presenting that to the group here. And so without further ado, let me just turn it over to you and let's go.
Yep, thank you very much, Sujit. Actually, when you were reading through your slides, at some point in time, you said, right, what we want to do is improve business performance, and we truly believe that supply chain planning delivers a key contribution to that. And I think that that supply chain triangle, which was part of the book, but which we also use at customers, that's, I would say, the way I have found to make that more tangible. Yeah? And so that triangle is explained here once more. And I want to use the triangle to explain how we support customers or prospects to understand what value S&OP can bring and to make the business case for an S&OP improvement project. But it can certainly also be used beyond that. I see that there are some existing customers in the webinar as well. So even if you have invested, let's say, monitoring how this is bringing value to the business and reporting on that value generation towards the broader executive team, that's equally essential. And here again, I believe that the triangle is a good framework to think that through. So again, it's been described in the first book in a lot of detail for the people interested. And for me, even before I was really thinking about value generation, the triangle for me captures the struggle I see in many supply chain departments. It's the fact that we want to improve service and at the same time reduce cost, and we have to deliver on inventory reductions, and that creates quite some pressure. And balancing the triangle is important because if service is if an improved service is impacting the top line and is leading to more sales, well, if I combine sales with costs, I get to margin. Yeah? And in the end, what I want to optimize is service minus cost is the margin. I want to optimize the margin over the invested capital. And that's what is at the center here. That's the concept of the return on capital employed, which is a financial concept. And also when I show the business case template, I truly believe that supply chain planning it touches the heart of this triangle. And if you touch the heart of the triangle, you touch the heart of value generation. So we use ROCE, which is a financial metric, return on capital employed. We use that ROCE really as a way to measure value and also as a way to communicate the value towards financial people in the company. And okay, so how does S&OP help? Well, it's shown over here. So S&OP or improved supply chain planning really touches the three corners of that triangle. So if you improve your S&OP or if you implement S&OP software, what do you expect to happen? I expect to improve service levels, or I expect to reduce the time to market, reduce lost sales. If I'm delivering to retailers, I might try to reduce penalties I need to pay to retailers. If I'm a fresh foods company, then maybe I will try to improve my shelf life. So a lot of the planning activities touch the service side. And as we will see in the business case template, when you touch the service side or improve the service, you should see how that translates to the top line, how that improves the top line result. It also touches on costs. So cost of goods. Yeah, if I'm more efficient in planning, maybe I can work with less overtime, or I can reduce the time lost to changeover. So basically improve the OEE and let us say use the existing assets to produce more volume, which will also lower the cost of goods. I see a lot of companies which don't really have connected planning. So we are buying raw materials, but without a decent outlook on what are the requirements for the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. So if on the buying or on the procurement side, I improve the outlook because of a better connected planning, here again, we should look on what are the benefits. Maybe I can buy at a better timing. If I buy at a better timing, what could be the impact on cost savings over there? And next to the cost of goods, yeah, we can also look at, okay, more robust planning should lead to less surprises. Again, there should be less last minute changeover, but maybe also less expediting in logistics. If I'm able to produce, let's say, more of the right products and less of the wrong product, it might also have an impact on write-offs or destruction. So we touch the service side, we should certainly also touch the cost side, and then we should also touch the cash or the capital employed side. And cash is working capital, and working capital is inventory plus the receivables minus the payables. Out of the three components of working capital, inventory is certainly the most complex. Well, and planning is all about inventory. So better planning should allow to improve the service while reducing the cost and at the same time reducing the inventory. And it should also help to use the assets in a more optimal way. And the second component of the capital employed in ROCE is the investment in fixed assets. Your machines, plants, any equipment you use to produce. Better planning should also allow you to better leverage those existing assets. And when we enter a business case discussion, this is the checklist we start from. What I want to come to is a business case template. Yeah? And this is how the template looks like. Let me quickly switch to it. I hope this is indeed the Excel. Here it is. We fill in company numbers here. I will come back to that. You will see here that we try to talk about top line effect. So how can we positively affect the top line? We try to talk about, okay, what could be the impact on costs? That's what you see over here. If we have an impact, we try to see what is the bottom line impact, whether you measure it by EBITDA or by EBIT. And we also try to look at, okay, what could be working capital effects. Here we have focused on inventory, but in this template, also if you say, well, if I'm more efficient, I can sell some of my assets, or I could delay a new investment in a new machine. So also the fixed assets could be taken into account here. And so there is the top line effect, there is a cost effect, and there is a capital employed effect, which you see over here. I will come back to that. It's going a bit quick now. We look at, okay, what are the project's costs? What is the return? And then we try to come to certain return metrics. So when we engage in a discussion with customers or with prospects, we really try to dig into the details and also use a template which is understood by finance. The metrics which are shown here at the bottom, those are the type of metrics that financial people like. This is financial lingo. But before we really get into the details, let me share some general results, like what is out there in the literature, you could say. And I won't spend too much time on explaining that in detail, but it gives an indication. And okay, supply chain 24/7. What do we see here? Business benefits of S&OP. Well, it seems like we can improve the service, reduce the cost, and improve working capital. So I think it's aligned to the message we have just brought. What are top benefits from S&OP? You can see it over here. People talk about improved forecast accuracy, improved order fill rate, improved inventory turns. Will not read the full list aloud. This research is general. It gives a direction, it gives an indication, but it's hard to just copy paste it to make your own business case. In our experience, if you want to make your own business case, you really need to get to your own situation and to your own details. That's what we use the Excel file for. But these are checklists. And if you make a business case, it's good to mention some of these, because like this is Gartner, which says companies with a higher S&OP maturity, revenues will be up, costs will be down, profitability will be up. This is also something which we have used in the past. One of the challenging tasks is like, how do I couple improvements in operational KPIs, like I will improve forecast accuracy or I will improve production efficiency. How do I translate that to more financial metrics? And this is an interesting one from Gartner, which says, okay, if you are between median and best in class, and you have a 1% improvement, what is Gartner saying? It will reduce the order to deliver cycle time. It will improve the perfect order performance. It will reduce the inventory in finished goods, reduce inventory obsolescence, and reduce transportation costs. So this is a benchmark from Gartner, which we have also used in the past to say, okay, if I'm implementing demand planning or I'm improving my demand planning, what could that bring to the company? Well, you can use these Gartner metrics to basically link an improvement in forecast accuracy to a service improvement, a cost improvement, and an inventory improvement. This is a client case, and I think all of this is just extra proof that it's not theory, it's practice. So if you do invest in S&OP, this is another example of the benefits being reported. This is across customers. So once more, I think these are checklists that you can use to say, okay, what are potential sources of benefits before we start applying it to your specific situation. And this is the last one coming from research from Laura Ceciri, where Laura says, okay, if a couple of conditions are met, the organization is in place, change management is tackled, the right leadership support is present, and technologies are deployed correctly, then the return on investment of supply chain planning is an impressive 7 to 12 months. And also when we make a business case, and I will then revert back to the Excel file to show how we do it in detail, but we typically look for a payback of 6 to 12 months. And in our experience, the assumptions you need to make are not too aggressive. Yeah? Even with relatively conservative assumptions, it's not too difficult to come to a payback of 6 to 12 months, which for me is impressive. It's much easier to make a business case for a supply chain planning system than it is to make a business case for an ERP system. The cost of a new ERP is often 10 times the cost of an APS system, but the benefits of an APS are much more obvious than the benefits from a new ERP. And still companies, it seems, feel much more comfortable to invest in a new ERP than they sometimes feel comfortable to invest in a new advanced planning system.
Hey, Bram, if I may interject here and ask a question. And by the way, I also want to encourage folks who are attending to send questions so that we can pose them to Bram. But you know, on this slide here, you mentioned the idea of the right leadership. You talk about the change management and the process issues with that and the technologies. Certainly, I'll share with you that my experience has been that in terms of the budget, in terms of the focus, in terms of how companies go about the change, there's an inordinate amount of attention on the technology piece, and it's almost thought of as a savior, silver bullet, whatever you want to call it. And so since you make this point about all three being important, I think it's the question that I have is, what percentage ratio would you put when it comes to budget deployment in these three areas, or effort deployment, or maybe budget is a measure of some kind of an effort? So, you know, how would you address that? You know, how much should companies focus on technology versus change versus the right leadership?
Yeah. Well, let us say all of them are required. In my past life, I worked as a management consultant, and then we worked on the organization and the change and the right leadership. But companies were not willing to invest in appropriate tooling. Yeah? And then in my management consulting time, we constructed Excels, and then companies solemnly promised that they were going to replace that with a decent tool, which they didn't do. And if you don't invest in decent tooling, you will get stuck in the process, or you will get stuck in the change and in the adoption. But you also can't do the tool without the other conditions. Unfortunately, yeah, some RFP processes for me are heavily biased on the tooling, and also we as implementation partners are squeezed a bit into the tooling corner. And unfortunately, I need to say that we've not always been able to deliver the benefits I would have wished to deliver. And then the issue was typically in a lack of leadership support and a lack of change, or the organization not being in place, like people wanting to implement RCCP without having an RCCP planner, or wanting to do demand or S&OP without having figured out which hires they would need in that field. So I mean, both need to support each other. And if I look at our projects, I mean, we typically try to provide the integrated approach, because if you lack one or two of the elements, it's a big risk that you will not realize the benefits that you have anticipated. That's why we started including that also in our approach. But I think the heaviest part is still on, I would say, the technology and the technology implementation. That's where most of the mandates are. That's where the biggest cost is. But the other, addressing the other elements are equally crucial, in the sense that they are a necessary condition. If the other elements are not there, you have a much bigger risk of failing in the implementation or failing to realize the benefits that you anticipated.
Yeah, thank you for that. Since you mentioned this, and there is a question coming in from the chat lines here, so let me try to tie that one in. You mentioned the case of ERP being 10x expensive,
Yeah.
and projects do get approved. And the questioner has kind of made the point that, of course, ERP is a requirement. You need the data to do planning, and that data resides in ERP. So maybe that's the reason why it gets approved. But having said that, and I would have some agreement with that point, that SCM systems need the data and ERPs can be the source of that data. But to the extent of just talking about the ROI, the case to be made about an investment, we agree with the sequence and those types of things. What is it about the ROI discussion of SCM tool that is not as well articulated, or it certainly doesn't have the same amount of success? Because as you said, even with 10x the spend, more ERP projects get approved than a SCP or supply chain improvement type of project. So you have some thoughts on that?
Well, good question. I think it might have to do with the understanding at the top level on what supply chain planning can do for the business. And I do believe that it's significantly underestimated. It's also poorly understood, and okay, and that's why in general, when people come to me and they say we want to do S&OP or we want to do improved supply chain planning, instead of starting to talk about S&OP, we typically start with talking about the triangle, because that's about the business issue. Mm-hmm. And we even start talking about the strategy, like, okay, who do you want to be in the market? How do you want to stand out? And do you want to be known by the best quality products, by the best service and the broadest total solution offering, or do you want to be known for cost? But once you tie people around the triangle and around what they want to be in the market, it's much more easier to then say, yeah, but okay, if this is what we want to reach, this is the type of S&OP and planning solution we will need. So I think having a different type of conversation also with the executive team, which is not too technical, because when they hear supply chain, some start sweating and they think it will become very difficult and very hard. So we need to avoid that trap. So talking business language and talking financial language, and that triangle is also easy to connect to financial language, and also the template we will show easily connects the triangle into a business case. And once we have the business case, we almost also have the critical success factors and KPIs, which we need to follow up later on after the implementation. Those are the things I try to use to overcome that hurdle. And I can't say I'm always successful, but at least where it works, you get to a completely different level of engagement and a completely different level of comprehension and buy-in from CEOs and VPs of sales and CFOs.
Very good. We should probably get back to your slides. Let me just add one thought from me. Actually, it's not mine, but someone had commented to me that supply chain planning systems come across in their ROI discussions as vitamins, that there might be a possible foreseen value, whereas ERPs might come across as painkillers because there's a transactional need right now. And that makes it a little bit more urgent to solve that. Certainly with, agreeing with the comment that ERP systems are required before an SCM type of system, because you just need the transactional data stored somewhere. But with that thought, let's get back to the presentation, and as more questions come in, I'll continue to talk to you.
Okay. Well, what I want to do now is switch back to the Excel file. It's based on a recent discussion I had, so it's anonymized, but it's data from a publicly listed company. So even if I would scroll here to the right, if it's a publicly listed company, yeah, the data you need to fill this in, you can see it. It's data I have taken from Morningstar. So if we help companies, if it's publicly listed, we can already populate it with the company's data. If it's not publicly listed, typically a first step is to get the data in, which of course is super confidential, but most of the data we deal with is super confidential and of course covered by NDAs. Yeah? And then, okay, once again, you see here the revenue or the top line. We will look at cost savings. We will look here at inventory savings, and those savings will then go into, okay, what are the costs, what are the benefits, and what are some return metrics that we can calculate. Starting at the top, yeah. We look for top line impact. One of the questions we typically ask is, okay, what is your current service level? Do we think we can improve service levels like on time and full performance? If my current service level is 90% and I want to bring it to 94%, so I want to improve service by 4%, how much of that 4% is currently lost sales? If we would assume that half of it is lost sales, well, then a 4% service improvement could lead to a 2% top line increase. Yeah? Other questions could be, okay, if we don't think it will lead to extra sales, well, if your service level today is poor, typically your salesperson gets beaten up by the customer. So when there is a new negotiation, the first half an hour is about how poor your performance is as a supplier. Yeah? And the reason the purchasing person is doing that is basically to talk down the price. So if you improve service levels and you are not affecting the sales volume, do you believe that improved service levels will lead to better prices because you have a different type of negotiation? Yeah? And typically there's a lot of pushback. Yeah? When we make business cases, it's hard to sell it on top line improvement. Yeah? And if you don't get that sold, then at least you need to tell to sales or to finance or to whomever, like, okay, well, but if service improvement is not going to lead to either more sales or to a better price, yeah, then we are not going to improve the service level. Then instead of improving the service, we will just take it in extra cost saving. So at least I always encourage supply chain people to have a relatively fierce debate with the sales colleagues, like, okay, if we improve service, what is this going to bring to the business? Yeah? If you would assume that there is no cost impact, yeah, what for instance here we would then say is, okay, if a 4% improvement will translate into 2% extra sales, of course, the 2% extra sales, I will need to buy extra raw materials. Yeah, but if I would assume that I need to buy the extra raw materials, but I won't have extra labor costs or something like that, it will just come extra. Well, what you see is that if you can sell a top line impact, it has immediately a very strong bottom line impact. So selling 2% more with 2% extra raw material costs, yeah, for this case here, it gives a 5.7 bottom line improvement. That's annual, so 5.7 million every year. So even if I would have only a 1% top line improvement, yeah, it's again 2.8 million every year. So even if I have only a 0.5% top line impact, bottom line impact here every year 1.4 million. So as soon as you even have a tiny top line impact, the bottom line impact is huge. And as the bottom line impact is huge, the payback calculation for any supply chain planning project becomes very easy, right? So if you can't put it in, do it, but it's not always easy to get it sold. Finance CEOs often don't like it. So that's why I say, if it's possible, build your business case on cost reductions. And if we then look at cost reductions, we revisit the long checklist I've just presented. So we might say, okay, I expect we will have less overtime. Can we quantify the overtime? For instance, I said here, out of these employee costs, I expect to save 1%. Is this type of annual saving? I expect I will be able to reduce expediting. What can I quantify? What is the current cost I would have in expediting? What's the saving I would be able to do? So here, expediting, I said, okay, let's assume that we can reduce with a certain amount. Depreciation of inventory. These are not exact figures, so this was just a template that we filled in for the company in case. But if you are in fresh products or you would be in spare parts, and on any of those extremes, I would say, you might have quite some write-offs or depreciations of inventory. Improved planning should typically also help to reduce write-offs. So we assumed a certain, let us say, a reduction of those costs here. So if you can't sell the top line, let's try to make a business case on cost reductions. And my suggestion often remains to do conservative assumptions here. But again, given the big numbers, even with conservative assumptions, I end up here with 2.2 million annual savings. And 2.2 million, again, that's significant. That pays for a pretty big investment in advanced planning software. You could think about SG&A costs. Question I often get here, like, do we think we can reduce the number of planners? My answer is typically, I would avoid making the business case on reducing the number of planners. Try to make the business case on some of those type of metrics, because maybe if you have a better planning process and a better planning software, you will have a different type of planners. But I would try to keep the number of planners, but maybe upgrade them in the level of skills they need to have to be able to anticipate more instead of being more reactive as we are working today. But okay, this is again a discussion company per company. I'm just trying to replay a bit the type of discussions we would have with companies. And then we look at inventory reduction here. So in this case, so also see here the days of inventory on hand. 27 days is not that much, but this is a fresh food company, so that already reduces the inventory because basically of the shelf life. Yeah? And the discussion we had with this company here was, okay, if you improve planning, you should always have an impact on inventory, always. Yeah? We've been a bit more conservative on the expected reduction in finished goods inventory. We've been a bit more assertive here on the estimate on the raw materials. And why is that? Because this specific situation, there is no connected planning in place. And then there the expectation is, if we are better able to connect raw material planning to the rest of the planning, that should give some efficiency in the inventory space. Yeah? And yeah, questions then can also be like, yeah, and how do you account for these inventory savings? What I typically try to do is say, okay, when it comes to the cost of the project, we try to look at the bottom line savings, and the bottom line saving here is 2.2 million. Yeah, inventory savings is a balance sheet operation, so this is a cash generation. So as you will see when I go down, typically we say, okay, the payback is, I don't know, 6 months or 9 months or 12 months. And if the cost of the project would be 2 million, I could say, well, the cost of the project, the 2 million, the investment I need to do basically can be paid by the inventory reduction I will put in place. Yeah. So that's more how I typically look at it. And I won't go into detail here, but we would be happy to share the template with you afterwards. We try to calculate it all the way down to the ROCE impact. So how do we add value for the company? Well, the ROCE before is 4.2. We will add 0.8 percentage points to that ROCE. So top of the sheet is trying to estimate benefits, and this is where we bring together the benefits and the costs. So, okay, these are the benefits year on year. This is an example investment cost. So what will be the services, what will be the software cost. You could add your internal costs, you could add any infrastructure costs, and here you see basically per year what would be the saving. So if this is the benefits I can generate and this is the cost in year one, I would say, well, basically I'm already generating a positive impact as of year one. Question could then be, but is it realistic that we will already generate those savings in year one? And this is where you can include factors. You could say, okay, well, instead of having the full benefits in year one, I will assume that I will have 50% of the benefits in year one, 70% as of year two, and then 100% as of year three. But that also depends, of course, a bit on the project we have in front of us. And then here we bring it together and we say, okay, in this specific case, the payback is 9 months. Again, with assumptions which are not too aggressive. If I would just add 0.5% here again on the top line, if I add 0.5% on the top line, you will see that the payback is already below 6 months. Don't do that. Don't come with a payback of 3 months because nobody will believe you. So, but it's a matter of looking for assumptions which are realistic, which are not too aggressive, which you do get sold within the company, add realistic project costs, and yeah, balance that out a little bit up to a situation where you end up with a payback of 6 to 12 months. And in our experience, that's not too difficult to end up with a payback of 6 to 12 months. That's also backed up by the research of Laura Ceciri. And it's also a very good investment. So there again, it's almost it's certainly a pity, but it's almost incomprehensible that a payback of 6 to 12 months, that's very short. If you invest in a new machine or you invest in automation, the payback is seldomly less than 12 months, at least in my experience. Not sure whether any questions came in while I was running through the template, Sujit. You are on mute, I see. Yeah.
Yes, there are a few questions, Bram, but let me just kind of quickly summarize the main learning that I'm getting, and certainly I agree with, is that while there is information out there from Gartner and Laura Ciceri and other, influencers, this model allows a company to make it their own. They
Yep.
can disagree with some things, agree with some things, tweak this, tweak that, and it has certainly been our experience that there is enough savings, enough return on the investment that the case always comes out to be positive, even when they are rather, how should I say, pessimistic about the savings. So let me just agree with you in that way. Couple of questions that have come into the group. One has to do with, we already discussed the very first one, ERP, so I'll skip that. Would this be valuable in a mid-sized company where the inventory is less than 10% of the total revenue, the company is very customer oriented, the inventory is turning pretty quickly? My answer would be, well, it depends, and once you plug the numbers, you would know. But let me give you the opportunity to address this question from Sandrine.
Yeah, where I typically start is with the triangle. I don't start with the Excel template. And I've had people that came to me and said, yeah, we want to do S&OP, and said, okay, what's the service? Oh, service is good. How is the cost? Cost is good. Do you have inventory pressure? Oh, no, we are a family-owned company, so cash is not an issue. And I simply responded, yeah, but if you don't have issues, then maybe you don't need S&OP. So for me, the question really resonates like, okay, first you need to address in the triangle, even far away from financial numbers and far away from S&OP as a potential solution. Where are the issues? Where do you think you are struggling as a business? Also think through strategy in the sense that, okay, I hear we are very customer driven. Yeah, but what does that mean? And what does that mean for what we are today? And what does that mean for what we want to be in the future? Does it mean that our current product portfolio, we expect it will expand with 20 to 50% over the next 2 to 3 years? Like, also, how does strategy tie into this? Because it will help people to realize that a better planning process is not optional, but that it is mandatory. And if you don't get that sorted out by the first two discussions, even if you come up with perfect numbers here, you will never get it solved. So I think the numbers are a crucial step in the change process. But if the numbers in itself would work, everybody would have a good planning system. And luckily for us, Sujit, that is not yet the case.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. One other quick question, and then we'll go back to your slides. Do you think it's possible to start the S&OP dynamics in a company without a fully supporting APS tooling? This is a question from Bert.
I would say many have tried, and at least many have got stuck. So it's I've been a management consultant. So 15 years ago, I would have said, yeah, that's how you need to do it. And all management consultants out there are still saying the same, because that fits their business model. But truly honest, I don't believe in it anymore. And why? Because even a simple company has way too much complexity to pull off a decent S&OP process with moderate tooling. And it's some of the discussions I have with really smaller companies, that smaller companies sometimes have the same complexity of companies which are 10 times as big. So the complexity is the same.
Mhm.
From a planning process and tooling perspective, they have exactly the same need, but it's very hard for them to get the necessary to mobilize the necessary financial means to do it in a proper way. And it almost hurts my heart, because on the one hand I would like to help them, but we are not magicians. If there is a certain complexity that needs to be tackled, there's also a certain investment that needs to be done. So in any case, I'm no longer doing it, and it has become part of my personal philosophy that I'm not there to implement tooling. I'm there to help companies to improve their business performance. Yeah? And we do that based on that triangle principle and the ROCE principle. And I'm a strong believer that you do need good tooling, because today's complexity cannot be dealt with appropriately without good tooling, but always in the combination with good process design and with good organization design and clever analytics, and having the right buy-in from the executive team and shareholders or family shareholders, which is not always easy, but which I personally also see as an interesting challenge to explain, to people who are unaware what they are missing.
Fair enough. I'll just say that, we have heard that type of thing for certainly I've been in this business for 20 plus years. So the more the things are different, the more they are the same. You got to think of technology in terms of how it works with the process and the people. Anyway, I know we have a couple slides left. Let's go back to that. And then I see that there are a couple more questions, so we'll try to cover them once we are through with that.
I think I pass the ball back to you, Sujit.
Perfect. So, very, very, very helpful so far, Bram. I know we'll tackle a couple more questions in terms of what we do. Certainly as a technology vendor, we have a technology tool set, but as you can see and hear in terms of what Bram is saying and what I'm saying, we do recognize that this is a process play, people play, as well as a technology play. It's not just one of those things. So the way we help is by taking this approach where it's encompassing. We try to address the question in a holistic way, and we try to bring different types of resources. And in that regard, if we would just go to the next slide there, Bram. Next week, not next week, I apologize, on March 17th, in our next webinar, that is, we'll talk about this book that we have written in terms of a practical guide for improving your sales and operations planning. And to the question that was just asked, whether can someone do it without the APS tool, we'll cover some of that, that how sales and operations planning is not just presenting dashboards and fancy slides. You need the underlying data work, which can be pretty heavy in terms of its number crunching, in its computing power. And so we'll talk about the 5-step methodology that we have. And in fact, we have a book on it written by our CEO, a practical guide for improving sales and operations planning. So let's move on to the next slide, Bram. So this is the section where we do questions, and we have been doing some. Let's see, let's pick up another one. This one is from Milan. I hope I'm saying the name right. Do you more often end up in discussion on operational benefits, or are you usually in discussion with board members around the ROI question?
Yeah. I would say my advice would almost be to, on the board level, more work on the awareness and on the vision and on the understanding on how this drives value, because once those people understand how it works and they are convinced, I think they can become the biggest supporters. And given it's typically not that difficult to make a business case based on cost figures, it's also fine, because again, in one of the recent discussions, I said supply chain is responsible for a couple of costs. So if you are willing to stick your neck out and to commit, and it's not just about the business case, it's also about monitoring that we will then drive the anticipated benefits, we have some of our customers where our pay is linked as an incentive to the value generation. We go that far. If we stick our neck out, you also need to stick your neck out. And then it's a fair deal, because if you have the top management understanding and buy-in and sponsorship, and you can make a business case on which in general it's not aggressive, it's relatively conservative, and you personally commit to at least drive part of those benefits, for me that's the ideal situation and the ideal starting point. So do we always get there? The answer is no. So in life you always need to be pragmatic, but at least if I may dream, that's what I would try to reach with people we engage with in this type of trajectory.
Very good. And then there is another question from Mark. Would you start an S&OP process in a company where the CFO, CEO, and COO are supportive, but the VP of sales does not want to participate at all, and the sales community also does not want at all? Well, that's interesting. I'll let you take the first crack at it. I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would be very curious why sales. In any case, it indicates a huge lack of understanding, and the fact that the VP of sales is not on board and the other executive team members are on board, yeah, also worries me a bit that there is a disconnect, and that disconnect will have a much broader impact than just on the S&OP process. So at least my first question would be like, this is strange or this is weird. I want to understand, and I want to be able to talk to that VP of sales to see what is actually the underlying reason or constraint. Because starting an S&OP with that as a starting position, at least, is extremely risky. That's my feeling.
Right. And if the C levels should have some influence over the VP of sales, they should be able to at least bring them to the table, if not outright convince them. All right, so we'll leave it there. And then there is a question about, will we be sharing the slides? That one is easy to answer. We will. And I think that is the list of questions. We certainly welcome any other questions if people want to send us via email. So Bram, if you would just go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
And so one question that, I see that we only have 2 minutes left, so I don't know how much time we can spend on this, but one question that I wanted to talk about, given your work in strategy and so on, do different types of companies come to these targets? We talked about, calculating the ROI in terms of inventory turns. What should one type of company come to what their target should be is the number the same for all companies in the same industry? Is it different? And could you give us some guidance about how companies could arrive at such a number?
Yeah. So I believe that in any company and in any sector, S&OP has a huge added value. So when it comes to the payback, we always aim for 6 to 12 months. I'm not, and I sometimes we more construct it from this angle and sometimes from that angle. And it has to do with, okay, what type of project do we have? What is the current situation of the company? What is politically easier or more difficult to get sold? So, and when it comes to defining targets, we have, again, this is in the first book and will also be elaborated in the second book. We have developed a benchmarking techniques which helps you to identify, okay, how far am I with respect to competitors? And we benchmark in 2 dimensions for the following reason. If finance makes a benchmark, they look at only one metric. So they will say, okay, we look at inventory turns. Mondelez seems to be best in class in inventory turns. So we want to get to turns of 7. Yeah. And then we say, okay, who is best in class in operating income? That seems to be Hershey. So that's 22%. So we want to be best in class in operating income, but there is nobody who is over here. Yeah, turns of 7 with operating income of 20%. That's not going to happen. Yeah, and that has to do with strategy. So if you have a differentiating strategy by having premium products or more complex products, typically if you have more complexity, you will have more inventory and your turns will be lower, but you will compensate with a higher operating income. If I would be able to add a private label player would probably be somewhere on the right here. The operating income would be lower, but they have less innovation complexity. If all goes well, they produce in big volumes. So most probably they could even have turns of 10, but they will have lower operating income. So when you define targets, this is the type of benchmarking technique we use to identify, okay, where am I today and what could be a realistic target. And this is an example where we have added a company like Hero, which is lagging a bit behind. You see that operating income is lower and inventory turns is also lower. So by investing in supply chain planning, Hero should be able to make steps. And which step? If we more really go for product leadership, we should go more in the direction of Hershey. If we more go for a broad product portfolio like Mondelez, and maybe the operating income will be less spectacular, but maybe I need to try to improve a bit more even on the inventory side. So this is one of the techniques we use to size the potential improvements. Let's put it like that.
Very good. So it helps to know who you are, where you are headed, what your strategy is, and based on those things, and there is a methodology that you have come up with, you can drive it. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. So if you would just flip the next slide, I think we really appreciate you taking the time, Bram, to talk to the group. I think the group appreciate it as well. Lots of good questions, good discussions. We appreciate all of you who asked the questions. Feel free to send it to us. We will be sharing the slides. And on March 17th, we'll be bringing the next in this series of webinars. So I appreciate all of you taking the time, and I hope all of you have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.